A truck and car collided in Kaikere on State Highway 27, killing one person and injuring 3 others. Around midday today, a third fatality, this time in the central North Island at the intersection of State Highway 30 and 32. There were no deaths on the roads over Easter last year. The country was at alert level 4 at the time. There's a call for businesses who flout Easter trading rules to be fined much worse than the current penalty, just $1,000. A number of big businesses opened their doors today, especially around Queenstown and Wanaka, saying the chance to capitalise on an influx of visitors could help offset COVID losses. Lisa Davies reports.
Trolleys laden with Easter treats.
A Coke, a Sprite and a V.
And bag after bag of groceries emerged from the 2 New World supermarkets in Wanaka today.
Need my groceries, so I'm really happy they're open today.
It's convenient, very convenient. How else would we eat?
These businesses are meant to be closed. First Union says opening their doors shows a flagrant disregard of the Holidays Act.
This is one of the breaks that the workers can have off and spend time with their loved ones. And effectively, this is just pure greed.
With the population here more than tripling this weekend, the Deputy Mayor says the supermarket's opening was crucial.
Normally we're a town of about 12,000 people. There's probably between 35 and 40,000 people in town. The supermarket's opening is more of a service to them than a disrespect to anyone else.
Foodstuffs also backing the store owners, saying the community has been severely impacted by COVID-19. Many are struggling, and Easter is a time where local tourism can provide a much-needed revenue boost.
For these supermarkets, quite frankly, it's like crocodile tears that are flowing into Lake Wanaka, and we just don't buy it.
The union has made an official complaint to the Labour Inspectorate.
I heard the fine was only $1,000, so I'm guessing they're going to make a lot more money than that.
But now there's a call for an overhaul of the law's enforcement.
They need to beef up the penalty. They also potentially should impose them to close their store for 2 or 3 days of trading.
Not everyone agrees.
I think it's somewhat antiquated and outdated notion that they shouldn't be opening. Time to move with the times.
As the annual Easter debate
I hope they don't get fined. Definitely not. I don't think they should. They don't deserve to.
over who can open and when continues on. Lisa Davies, One News.
Napier City Council has put a lid on all new gaming machines or venues to curb the city's spike in gambling. In the 3 months after last year's nationwide lockdown, the city lost nearly $5.5 million to poker machines, one of the highest amounts on record.
We're seeing more and more wahine come in to use the machines to escape situations at home.
Local councillors are also calling for the government to overhaul the gaming trusts system. One of the frontline police officers on the Red Fox Tavern case says he's surprised 2 men have finally been convicted. Publican Chris Bush was murdered during an aggravated robbery at the pub in 1987. And this week, 2 men were finally found guilty. Former police sergeant Tony Boucher spoke exclusively to Logan Church.
This was big. It was only the second time that I had attended a scene that was a aggravated robbery murder.
Former police officer Tony Boucher was woken by a phone call early on the Sunday of Labour weekend, 1987.
How quickly can we lock up the offenders was what was going through my mind at the time, and I'm sure it was going through the mind of every detective and constable that was on that job on that day.
The Red Fox Tavern, an hour south of Auckland. One moment a popular small town pub, the next a crime scene. Publican Chris Bush dead, the safe ransacked.
That morning when I arrived was a crime scene investigation. There were some urgent area inquiries going on, door knocking on anybody that might be in the vicinity of the Red Fox Tavern.
As media liaison officer, Boucher's job was simple.
I decided my job essentially was to keep the story on the front page of the newspapers.
It's not as if the police are short of leads. 3.5 weeks down the track, they've got more than 160 suspects to the slaying of Chris Bush.
Yes, that was quite nice.
What do you do with the thing?
I put it in the rubbish.
It was an inquiry from the outset which we knew we would be relying on information from members of the public. We were confident at the time that there would be an early breakthrough, that there would be arrests made.
But the years passed. So many interviews, desperate pleas for information.
I appeal to you so very, very strongly, if not for the sake of myself and my daughters and the community, for their own sakes, to please come forward.
The first interview with Gay, I recall that vividly in a very delicate way. We had to approach that and get her cooperation to do the interview and subsequent interviews as well. Respecting her grief and respecting her privacy and that sort of thing, but also acknowledging that we wanted to catch these offenders, and I think that probably carried the day with her. A wonderful family, really are. They were a wonderful family. Whenever you go into these inquiries, there's always the idea that we're going to wrap this up pretty quickly. Never believed it would take 33 years.
But those 33 years later,
I convict you of the 2 charges of aggravated robbery and murder.
In breaking news, the jury in the trial of one of New Zealand's longest-running cold cases has just returned its verdict in the last few minutes.
A jury of 12 people delivered guilty verdicts for 2 men.
I have been keeping an eye on the trial as it progressed. I've got to say that I was a bit of a skeptic. I wasn't 100% convinced that they were going to get a conviction.
A long, complex trial.
When the verdict came through, what was your reaction? How did you feel?
Shock.
Mark Hogarth and his accomplice are now sitting in prison, waiting to be sentenced in May. The first responding police officers, many now gone, including the lead detective.
There's myself and Brian Rowe. Rest in peace.
But a lesson learnt from one of New Zealand's most infamous cold cases.
What I've learned from it is for all those unsolved crimes out there, the serious ones, wherever the offenders are, don't rest well at night, because you never know when you're going to get the knock at the door from the police who are going to arrest you and successfully prosecute you.
A cold case now closed. Logan Church, One News.
60 years ago, life changed for New Zealand's women with the arrival of the pill. Reliable contraception lowered the country's birth rate and paved the way for women to have greater independence. But as Kate Nicol-Williams reports, 6 decades on, addressing contraception can still be a major issue.
It was the peak of the post-war baby boom, where Kiwi women were having 4 kids on average. But a revolution was happening in doctors' rooms around the country.
The pill really changed women's lives. I think of all the events that have happened, the introduction of the pill, giving women better control of their fertility so that they could do other things, be educated.
In 1961, she was one of the first in New Zealand to take the contraceptive pill. Her husband, a medical student at the time, came home with free samples.
I said, yes, that sounds good, because I'd already had 2 children using a diaphragm and 1 abortion, so I knew what the consequences were for having an unplanned pregnancy.
While some saw the pill as freedom,
economically it's better that you have 2, apart from the population growth side of things.
Others were concerned about the changing roles of women, and some experienced serious side effects.
How can one really justify the continued use of the pill when life is threatened this way?
I think here that one's got to be aware also of the beneficial effects of the pill.
While it was subsidised in the UK, the New Zealand government wasn't interested. Still, uptake was higher than in most other Western countries. At first, the pill was only available to married women.
When they have their next baby is important to the whole family. We used to ask women to put on their wedding rings, or we gave them things to wear so they could come into our clinics in the early days.
But Dame Sparrow pushed for change, prescribing the pill to university students.
I thought I might lose my job, but after no speaks for about a fortnight, we came to an agreement, and my continued.
Today there's far greater choice and access to contraception. In some cases pills are available over the counter, but for some women cost and where they live are still barriers.
It would be fantastic if all contraception visits to your primary healthcare provider was free.
The government funded 2 widely used insertable contraceptives in 2019, but accessibility criteria varies between DHBs.
There's a process to go through for those DHBs to work, for the ministry to work with the DHBs to make sure that that's brought into line.
And with waiting lists for them at family planning taking up to 4 weeks, there are calls for more government funding.
We haven't had an increase of substance for over 12 years, so it's really difficult for us to increase our services or increase our clinician time.
This pioneer also thinks access could still be a lot easier, though she's proud of how far we've come.
There ought to be statues erected to the pill.
A small pill that's helped women achieve so much. Kate Nicol-Williams, One News.
Mayor Utoni might stay with us. The reality of a Trans-Tasman bubble edges closer. The calls to look beyond our neighbours for quarantine-free travel.
Allowed to have it.
Why some people catch COVID-19 more than once, and what role virulent variants are playing in the body's immune response. Plus, thousands flock to Iceland's spectacular volcano, but how close is too close?
How come you weren't allowed the pill?
Feel the magic tonight on One. First up, heartwarming tales with
Do you want to watch The Wizard of Oz?
Judy Garland stars in the all-time
No,
classic
not really.
The Wizard of Oz. And later, Beauty is in the
Do
Eye
you?
of Moira on Schitt's Creek.
I want to see Schitt's Creek. What time was Schitt's Creek?
I've been asked to make a caricature cake. It is definitely a fine line.
What time is what?
What time is Schitt's Creek?
Schitt's Creek.
Mm.
Do you know about it?
Mm.
What is that? What sort of thing?
It's a comedy.
Oh. Andy's going to a comedy tonight. He's going to see Melissa tonight. First time since, for a year, since they had a row at lockdown.
Kia ora, Arnold. We have some breaking news for you. A train has derailed in a tunnel in eastern Taiwan with some reports of fatalities and serious injuries. The train was carrying up to 350 passengers in 8 carriages when it came off the rails and hit the tunnel wall. At least 60 people have been pulled to safety. The rest are believed to be stuck in the wreckage. There have been reports in the past few minutes of more than 30 deaths. Oh, with the Trans-Tasman travel bubble possibly just a week away, there's questions about why other nations haven't been considered as an option before now. Several Asian countries have handled the pandemic better than Australia. And as Corazon Miller reports, staying closed could cost us billions.
Strutting it out on a Taiwanese stage is almost as good as life gets for this Kiwi drag queen. If it weren't for the fact some of his closest family, including his 92-year-old grandma, are more than 9,000 kilometres away.
It's really getting to the age where I don't know how much longer I will be able to see her.
But with our focus across the Tasman, a quarantine-free Asian connection remains a distant dream.
The uncertainty, I think, is the most vaccine.
Officials say it's all about risk.
We do take a risk-based approach here, and we'll continue to do that as we look to, opening up the border.
Taiwan is one of several Asian countries to have kept the virus in check. It's had 1,023 cases compared to our 2,495, and Australia's more than 29,000. And it's had fewer deaths, just 10 compared to our 26, and Australia's 909.
Oh wow, I didn't realise Australia had that many.
Australia had 336, including several that triggered a lockdown in Brisbane.
Taiwan has been a huge success story. They've been very proactive, they've got good systems, they've never needed a lockdown, and New Zealand does already have very good trade relations with Taiwan, and I think that would be a great country to consider starting with.
It's a similar story in Vietnam, and despite a higher number of overall cases, Singapore is now seeing similar weekly numbers to Australia. Their success prompting growing calls for the government to look beyond our immediate backyard.
I can see the sense of going with Australia first, but I think we should be moving fast to be joining up to those places in Asia that actually have COVID under control.
You might see New Zealand reopening to some other countries that are very low risk ahead of a broader reopening. Vaccinations may play a role in that as well. I think we'll start having those conversations in the second part of the year.
But this business expert says that's too late.
The longer we wait, the more likely others are going to open up to our trading partners, and we lose out on this window of opportunity. The problem is there's no public discourse about this matter because people don't know what's happening. Naturally, they are fearful. Because there's also concern that, look, the virus originated from Asia, but the facts are that many of these countries have successfully managed to deal with COVID.
Our connections in the Asia-Pacific Economic Forum offering a way forward.
To use our leadership in that organisation to create protocols across international borders, and that could kickstart, a really important process for our economy.
There's a lot of wealthy Taiwanese who are now staying in the country. But if they could unleash that onto New Zealand, a safe country, I don't see any downside to it. Please, if you're a New Zealander, support Bubble, because I would love to see my family. Let's make this happen politically.
And kickstart the vital Asian connection. Corazon Miller, One News.
There's concern in the US about fake vaccination certificates being sold online. It comes as more and more venues are requiring vaccine passports, as ABC's Arali Rashif explains.
If you've gotten a COVID-19 vaccine, you probably have one of these. Vaccine cards quickly becoming the ticket to a safe return to normalcy. But this morning, experts warning fraudulent cards are popping up for sale online.
We've seen a 300% increase from what was available in December.
According to cybersecurity firm Checkpoint, this listing on the dark web offering a fake vaccine certificate for $150. The vendor allegedly accepting the cryptocurrency Bitcoin as a payment method to avoid being traced, claiming not everybody will like to take the COVID-19 vaccine and we provide proof of having been vaccinated. Healthcare professional Savannah Sparks says she came across TikTok users who appear to be peddling phony vaccine verification. Her videos exposing the alleged scammers, garnering millions of views.
I have been calling these people out. My goal is to provide a strong voice for evidence-based medicine to show that joking about public health and patient safety is not a joke.
Doctors say those counterfeit vaccine cards could pose a risk to public health.
Those that are hesitant to get the vaccine, for whatever reason, may turn to alternatives. They potentially have real risk of carrying the virus and transmitting to others.
This week, the White House announcing it will help set national guidelines for managing vaccine passports, which provide digital proof you've been vaccinated or recently tested negative for COVID.
Unlike other parts of the world, the government here is not viewing its role as the place to create a passport, nor a place to hold the data of citizens.
But as New York becomes the first state to pilot voluntary vaccine passports as a way to safely reopen, cybersecurity experts are raising concerns about fraud and the potential for hackers to gain access to
information. And hope that they get an easy return on somebody that clicks a link or offers personal information.
More than 128 million people globally have had COVID, but there's still lots to learn about the virus that's brought the world to a standstill. The big questions are around immunity and reinfection. The BBC's Rebecca Morelli looks into it.
We've been living with coronavirus for more than a year and learning how the immune system responds to it. A big question we can now answer is, can you catch COVID twice? Barry Macquarie is a surgeon in Northern Ireland. He caught COVID in March last year, but on New Year's Eve he tested positive again.
It was definitely much worse second time, and again temperatures, flu-like symptoms, lost taste and smell on this occasion for around 2 weeks.
Reinfections like this are being documented, but they're still relatively rare. Recent research suggests that immunity for most people lasts at least 8 months. But the chance of a second infection may be linked to how the immune system responded to the first.
It differs a lot between different people. So you can have someone with a really high super duper response, and then you can have other people with not such a good response. But if it starts off not so good, then the longer you go, the more chance of getting reinfected.
New coronavirus variants are spreading in different countries. So can variants affect immunity?
Could you pull those
If you've had
curtains
COVID, you
over?
will have made
I think we
antibodies.
should keep.
And if you have enough of them and the virus comes back, they
I'll put the
attach to its
heater
spike,
on.
blocking reinfection. For the UK variant, a mutation called N501Y changes the spike. But antibodies from an older infection can still recognise it. So past immunity should work. But another mutation alters the spike in a different way. It's called E484K, and it's found in variants like South Africa's and Brazil's. It means existing antibodies now struggle to recognise the spike, making reinfection more likely. This has happened in Manaus, where Brazil's new variant first emerged. During the first wave of the pandemic, the city had to dig mass graves. Scientists estimate up to 3/4 of the population caught the virus and developed immunity. But cases have soared again, and researchers think many of these are reinfections with the new variant. Vaccinations are now being rolled out around the world, so do vaccines offer better immunity? Vaccines can be tweaked to deal with variants, and scientists say getting jabbed is the best way to prime the immune system.
If you've had the vaccine, we can be fairly confident that you've made the best immune response that you are capable of making. But if you've had an infection, you may have made a suboptimal immune response, and that could be substantially improved by vaccination.
There's still much to learn about immunity, but scientists say understanding how this protection works is vital in the fight against COVID.
Now, just a warning before we move on to our next story, you may find some images in it distressing. The jury in the murder trial of George Floyd has heard from his girlfriend about how the couple battled opioid addiction. A taped conversation between the officer accused of Mr. Floyd's death and his boss was also played in court. US correspondent Anna Burns-Francis reports.
Witnesses at the scene of George Floyd's arrest believed they saw him die. Today, the court for the man accused of his murder heard from the first paramedics to arrive. What those witnesses saw was true.
What did his condition appear to be to you, overall?
In lay terms, I thought he was dead. I didn't see any breathing or movement or anything like that.
Did he appear to be unresponsive to you at that point in time?
From what I could tell, just standing from a distance, yes.
The paramedics attempted to resuscitate Floyd in the ambulance, but to no avail.
Did anything change in terms of your assessment of his condition and status?
No, I showed up, he was deceased, and I dropped him off at the hospital, and he was still in cardiac arrest.
Former police officer Derek Chauvin is facing charges of manslaughter and murder after kneeling on George Floyd's neck for more than 9 minutes one evening last May.
Don't do me like that, man.
The arrest made after Floyd allegedly tried to use a fake $20 note at a convenience store, but the picture of his life being painted in court is a complicated one. Floyd met his girlfriend Courtney Ross while working as a security guard at the Salvation Army.
It was fun. It was an adventure always with him.
They were together 3 years, but the pair struggled with opioid addictions.
It's a classic story of how many people get addicted to opioids. We both suffered from chronic pain.
Drugs were present in Floyd's system the day he died, and the defence argues it was a combination of factors that ended his life. But when Chauvin's boss rang him straight after the incident, the former officer made no mention of kneeling on Floyd's neck.
You just had the whole thing go down. He was going crazy.
It's a use of force Floyd's family believe killed him. Anna Burns-Francis, One News, New York.
He wasn't going crazy, he was cooperating. He wasn't violent.
Now singing from the same song sheet. What these two prime ministers want shipped out of their hometown. Plus, searching for signs of life on Mars in Rotorua. How our geothermal hotspot is giving scientists clues about the red planet. And the system moving north has just passed over you and will continue to move up the country overnight and tomorrow. And a grey, cold day for Christchurch, just making it to...
I'm very interested about the vaccines and getting an immunity and all that, but sometimes it's just too much to take in. I had a text from Karen, your friend Karen, the other day. Are you getting the vaccine? Are you getting the vaccination? She said, it's dangerous. This is the bit I liked. Thousands of people are dying from having the vaccination. Talk about fake news. She's a beaut, isn't she?
She is.
She's not having it. Oh dear. So I replied, yes, I'm having it. I said, I believe the science. According to that forecast, it's going to rain tomorrow. I think I might be having a trip down to the laundry to dry my clothes. But we'll see. We'll see. There was a documentary last night on TV about, I'll tell you later.
Calls for Auckland's port to be moved north, but Auckland's mayor says more work needs to be done to get the plan over the line to free up the prime real estate currently occupied by the port. Helen Castles explains.
A key piece of Auckland's waterfront described as an eyesore and a waste of space.
I'd like to see more from my city than a waterfront with a second-hand car lot on it.
I don't think there'd be many cities in the world that would go about building a car park on their sort of prime real estate like that.
These heavy hitters getting behind the campaign to move Ports of Auckland. Businessman Wayne Brown's behind the lobby group and thinks operations should head north.
It's not just of changing the port, it's rescuing Auckland financially and visually and reclaiming the harbour. And there's a large group behind me.
For Northland, of course, tremendous boom to have port expansion there. It needs rail expansion, but you can envisage you get rather more affordable housing around a port development in the Northland area. So it's got to be a win-win.
The Labour coalition government commissioned a report into the future of the port. Wayne Brown was involved. Among its findings that Northport and Tauranga should share international shipping, with Northport eventually taking the major role. And that freeing up Auckland port land for commercial and residential use could generate $200 million a year.
It's a glorious idea, and it's a practical idea, and it's a sensible idea for time, but it lacks, I guess, strategy.
Despite speaking to more than 80 stakeholders and experts, Wayne Brown's report went largely ignored. Instead, the government commissioning Australian consultants to draft another report. They're finding that the Manukau Harbour is the best place for a new port.
We've got alternatives like Northport or Tauranga to service, Auckland. And I think there is a lot of misinformation.
The final decision on the ports of Auckland will need the support from Auckland's mayor.
But I've been told it's probably easier to train a hip over via pole dancer.
Mr. Goff says he is open to the idea of moving the port, but wants more work done to make sure it adds up. Helen Castles, One News.
A small seaside town's hoping to recreate the thrill of the America's Cup when it plays host to a global sailing event. SailGP, billed as the Formula One of sailing, is coming to Littleton Harbour next January. As Maddie Lloyd reports, it'll bring a much-needed boost for the local economy.
Naval Point Club in Littleton is passionate about its sailing. And the excitement at Team New Zealand's recent America's Cup heroics now turning to another major event next year.
We've got SailGP happening right here on our back doorstep, which is just so mega, amazing. First time, I think, in sailing history where we'll have such a big event.
SailGP is an annual global championship with 8 countries competing. This is the first time New Zealand's ever hosted a leg of the series and the first time a Kiwi team's been included. It's led by current Olympic and America's Cup champions Blair Tuke and Peter Burling.
It's huge, really huge. We so need this, the positive vibe that comes with it.
I think for Cantabrians, it's finally a catalyst to feeling like recovery is well and truly achieved and we are now a global city.
And for hard-hit local businesses, it's a big bonus.
Because we have a lot of IT specialists, web designers, we also have artists in abundance. So that's going to give them that acknowledgement worldwide as well.
The event is expected to bring in over $30 million for the economy of Christchurch and will be broadcast to more than 250 million people worldwide.
This is an opportunity to showcase our incredibly diverse population and also showcase Ngāti Wheki, Rāpaki and Whakaropo.
Infrastructure and event planning's full steam ahead for January when mishaps aside, the world's best sailors hit the water. Maddie Lloyd, One News.
Well, Rotorua and the planet Mars might be hundreds of millions of kilometres apart geographically, but scientists think they could have something in common. They're hoping our most active geological region might provide clues about life on the red planet. Yvonne Kahana reports.
Hell's Gate, hot and inhospitable.
This is saying 80.6 degrees where I am.
But Rotorua's geothermal landscape has the potential to tell us so much more.
Today we are out sampling for our Rotorua on Mars project, which is looking at the possibility of potential life on Mars.
Scientists focusing on these small silica growths found around the outside of hot pools. Inside them are the remains of microbes, simple life.
We know that these growths contain tons of microbes, really well preserved. We've been looking at hot spring deposits from way back, billions of years ago, and can still identify microbial remains.
Similar silica formations have been found on Mars. The question is whether they too contain evidence of life.
When that rover found these deposits of silica that looked like little fingers that were growing upwards in the hot springs, we immediately turn our sights to places like Rotorua, Yellowstone, and we take a look and find similar kinds of features.
The team is studying the samples under an electron microscope to understand if they can only exist in the presence of life.
We're trying to figure out whether or not they're caused by biological or physical factors, whether or not I can make them grow in a lab without microbes.
We want to go, of course, to Mars, get some of these samples, bring them back here, and find out if there's signs of life in there. And if that's the case, then we've found a second genesis of life in the solar system.
Hundreds of millions of kilometres apart, but both the Mars rover and Kiwi scientists are on the same mission. Yvonne Tahana, One News.
And we brought you that story with the Aotearoa Science Agency. Now, an erupting volcano in Iceland